It's a world first. The New Zealand Police have thrown open their station doors, their records, their frontline operations to intense scrutiny. This is why.
One sweltering evening on the streets of Minneapolis, yet another black man falls victim to police brutality. The killing of George Floyd has sparked outrage not only across America, but also across the entire world.
We are fighting an institutional systemic problem.
TV presenter Baird and Qantas flight attendant Davies were last seen on Sunday night. The police officer allegedly shot both men on Monday using his police-issued handgun.
What we have found right across the Met is institutional and systemic racism, sexism and homophobia.
And it's happening here in Aotearoa.
Thousands turning up in Auckland and Wellington today for Black Lives Matter rallies.
As a Samoan immigrant who grew up in South Auckland, racism affects me every day.
It's borderless. I mean, this issue is actually in different parts of the world.
Police here coming under fire too.
The violence of policing is nowhere near the scale of what we see in the United States. And we know, though, that by design it is created of the same ingredients.
At a time when police around the world are under the spotlight, the results from a project on systemic racism and bias in the New Zealand Force are out. It's been looked at before, but this time it's different.
It is a project that is done with police and communities rather than research that's done on police.
Kia ora, I'm Sharon Brett-Kelly, and today on The Detail, why the world is looking at a project with the unwieldy title of Understanding Policing Delivery. The focus is fairness and equity.
If we're thinking about making the police behave in ways that are equitable and fair, it's a little bit disingenuous to think that the police are going to be an island of equity in a sea of inequity.
I'll talk to an officer involved in the project, a project that asked police to work hand in hand with their frequent critics. One of them is the independent panel chairperson, Professor Kylie Quince, the Dean of Law at AUT.
The thing that's most significant, I think, is that there is an operational and advisory group, which is a group of 30 frontline officers from the top of the country right down to the south, who have given that operational frontline policing lens and insight as we've gone along with the project.
So what does that mean? Does that mean that they are consulted, that the researchers actually go out there with them to see how they work?
Yes, both of those things. So often an organisation will pick up research that's been done on them and say, that's never going to work here. These people don't understand what it is that we have to cope with or deal with. So the purpose of the OAG, or the Operational and Advisory Group, is so that as things have progressed, we've tested certain things. So the researchers have said, what about if we made a recommendation about this kind of training at police college or this kind of resourcing on the front line? Would that work? So they've given insights as to what policing is like now at the front line and what could work if it were suggested that they did things differently.
And quite incredible how much access to information and data. Quite amazing how the police have opened up.
Yes, and again, that's part of the partnership of this being done with police, researchers and community, is that there has been openness and transparency in terms of being able to look at police data systems, being able to look at police policies, training, procedures, the whole organisation.
I mean, this is your area of expertise. You know, this is what your work is in. What did you make of what you saw from this study, from this project?
Good question. So what I would say is me and like most of the other members of the independent panel, we are 15 people from academia, different community advocacy spaces, and it's quite a risk for us to get involved with. We're all people who've been quite critical of the police in the past, so a bit of reputational risk. You lose a bit of street cred to be seen, to be patched over, if you like, to now we've been captured by the police. We haven't been captured by the police. So it's been quite an eye-opener for me to, take off the sort of necessarily critical lens and be a critical friend to the police to say, okay, well, can we, maybe look at this in a way that is very future focused and As a Māori researcher, I think about that as being, involved in what we call mukapuna decision making. How can we make policing better for our own children in mukapuna in the future? So that takes it away from critiquing or looking at individualised people, officers or a current minister, a current policing environment necessarily.
There have been stories around for a long time about bias and racism in the police. Are those areas that have concerned you over the years?
Absolutely. So I've personally been involved in critique around racial profiling of Māori communities.
We'll be driving in the car and then we get pulled over, but we have our registration, we have everything. And I remember the cop guy saying, "Oh, because you didn't indicate," or something like that. And then I was just like, wait, what?
Of inappropriate and discriminatory, disproportionate use of force against Māori.
But there was nothing that I did or said to provoke the police into treating me the way that they did. Because even if it hasn't happened to them personally, someone in their whānau has got a story of being brutalised by the police.
Inappropriate media in relation to the Police 10-7 program.
Tonight on Police 10-7, we're looking for your help to find a group of murderous thugs. 2 young creeps, a half-wit with a gun, a false beard and a turban. 3 vicious apes, 2 fat women and a man with a gun.
So that took some relationship building. The other way in which this project has been quite different is that we've taken our time. It's been 3 years. It's been built around kaupapa Māori research methodology. Core to that doesn't mean that it's necessarily research about Māori or by Māori, just that it's done in a way that values relationships. So whakawhanaungatanga has been key to this, because we began literally as people quite suspicious of one another, I would say.
But standoffish.
Yes.
So how did you make that? How were you able to kind of break that down?
Yep. Time and not starting the hard part of the research, of opening the books, opening the data, going on ride-alongs, going to police college, talking with people who have been at the tough end, the sticky end of police encounters. So it's taking a lot of time building trust and relationships, and that did take time.
I remember that. It was like, I've often described it as, there was like a river between us.
Superintendent Scott Gemmell is the chair of the police operational group of frontline officers involved in the project.
On the one side was the independent panel and the research teams, and on the other side was a whole lot of police officers, and the scepticism by both sides as to whether we're actually going to be able to pull this off or even come together was palpable, but it changed. It was really quite cool to see, and I have to say a lot of that, in fact all of it, I think is down to Sir Kim.
Kim Workman is leading a group of rangatira Māori on a recently established government advisory program called Understanding Policing Delivery. And now there's potential for Māori to deliver a world-leading approach to Indigenous policing.
And the approach that he was forthright on right from the start, and that was to find a common purpose, to build a relational aspect into this research that I had never heard of before. And so we found our common purpose, which was to be able to do the best for our community as we possibly could. We started to get to know each other and know that although we have our differences in what we do, there are people that sit behind these facades. There are people that have worked really hard in terms of research. There's people that have worked really hard in their public and private lives on the independent panel. There's police officers who when they started would never have thought they'd be involved in any research, but certainly are committed to doing the best service that they can do. And suddenly the banks of the river started to crumble, and we became really united. And that didn't happen straight away. It took time, but full credit to those people that drove it towards being what it has become. So I feel very privileged now to sit here and know that I was a part of it.
At the time, we're talking about 2020 when this project was launched, were things pretty bad? I mean, we know, there was overseas, yes, things were bad. Black Lives Matter, and there were reports from the UK as well talking about racism and the police bias in other areas. Were things bad here?
We did have protests. We did have Black Lives Matter protests I was involved in them. I was an operation commander here in Auckland City.
The march along Queen Street ending near the US consulate. Then a moment of silence and a knee for George Floyd. And in our capital, it was met by a handful of politicians at Parliament's forecourt. A clear message for those in power.
For the second Black Lives Matter protest, we had 2 here, and both were attended by, I think the first one would have been between 10 and 15,000 people. The second one would have been up to 10,000. There was another one in Wellington. There's a lot that set in behind what I consider a difference in the approach that was taken to policing those big protests at the time of George Floyd's death. Was a different approach to what we'd seen in overseas jurisdictions. So I think we were ready at that time to try something unique, to try and invest into our own practices and policies and procedures just that little bit more, to see that where the bias, inequities or unfairness sit within our systems.
Although these reports, 7 of them that are out this week, some pretty serious feedback from people who think they're unfairly targeted for searches, especially warrantless searches, are subject to greater use of force, are unhappy with police behaviour at family harm investigations and mental health events. Was that hard to read for you?
It still is. It is hard to read because it's their experience. And we, in police and as a member of the Operational Advisory Group, we listen to all these. We've been part of the research, and it has been really hard to listen to, but it's also been invaluable because we think that we're doing something really well. We're trying our best to do something in a particular way that we think might be best. But when we get feedback, which is really to be encouraged, we realise that there's some members of our community that are not experiencing a good service from us, or the service that they deserve, the service that we could do.
This project is about systemic bias. It's about systems, not people. So it's not about investigating individual officers' attitudes, behaviours or conduct, but it is about thinking about how are they trained to look at things with a fairness or equity lens? Are they trained to look at things with a fairness or equity lens? Are they aware of the history of policing in New Zealand and that can underpin or inform some of the attitudes of particular communities? Māori, tangata whaikaha, so disabled people, rainbow communities, Pacific communities. Where does that mistrust come from? I have absolutely changed my attitude in relation to seeing there are a lot of great people in the police. They need to be appropriately trained. Many of them have a learning outlook that they are willing to change their behaviours. So this is really an organisational learning opportunity for the police. How can we make sure that those people are in the best position to be able to police fairly across every community in this country, whether you are a Māori woman calling for the 15th time for a family violence incident in Flaxmere, or whether you're calling from Remuera for a burglary of your garage. You should be treated with the same respect and the same professionalism, whether it's your first time, your 15th time, no matter where you are calling from in the country.
And currently that's not happening?
Correct. So the research has shown that there is still profiling in relation to who police encounter and why, and what sort of service they offer to people. There is different language and body language used. There are different outcomes in terms of use of force and decisions to lay charges. So those are the 3 areas of focus for the research: who police stop or who police encounter and what that encounter is like. There are 5 million encounters between police and New Zealand citizens every year. Then whether or not force is used and what kind of force is used against them. And then in the 3rd area of focus is the decision-making around laying of charges, and what factors are relevant, particularly in those last two areas, and whether or not they use force or lay charges.
So what surprised you in the results of this project?
Many things haven't surprised me in terms of people like looking at praise and complaint data. Unsurprisingly, people like being treated respectfully, being spoken to in a way that demonstrates an ethic of care. So surprising things, probably the gap between Māori and Pākehā people in New Zealand. Controlling for all other relevant factors, there is an 11% gap in terms of rates of prosecution. So if you are Māori, you are 11% more likely to be charged with an offence than a Pākehā person in the same situation. And when I say controlling for relevant factors, those other relevant factors are priors. So have you had previous convictions? Have you had previous charges laid? Are you a young person? You are more likely to be granted the benefit of discretion and a warning, for example, or alternative disposition or outcomes if you're a young person. So controlling for age and controlling for gang affiliation or membership. Once you've controlled all of those factors, there is still an 11% gap. As a he tangata Māori, that is really concerning. So that's something that probably not surprising, but we've got hard evidence now that there is that form of systemic discrimination that needs to be accounted for and addressed.
Given the environment that we're in and, the current news that is sort of dominating at the moment, it's about racism, it's about a very divided New Zealand that some would say isn't looking positive at the moment. I guess how much pressure are police under, even if individuals or as an organisation they want to put things right? It must create a real underlying tension there.
Yeah, it's not that underlying, really.
No.
It's really quite explicit and obvious. So I think there are a couple of ways that we can frame this that addresses that tension. One is that there has been a global spotlight on the legitimacy of policing for a number of years now. So in the UK, of course, there's the Baroness Casey inquiry. From the United States and North America, of course, the Black Lives Matter movement. And here, a number of things that have called into question the legitimacy and trust and confidence in policing. So this isn't necessarily isolated to a New Zealand or Aotearoa experience. New Zealanders as a whole, I think, really value as part of our cultural values as Kiwis, fairness and equity. We like to think that even people that I unsurprisingly don't share political leanings with to the right and perhaps people in our current government, part of their current agenda is no preferential treatment. Well, that's exactly what we want too. We don't want preferential treatment. We want, as I said in relation to that example of, whether you're calling for a burglary from a wealthy suburb or whether you're in one of New Zealand's most deprived communities, we also want the same treatment for those people. You call the police and they come and they treat you with respect and professionalism and an ethic of care. So, again, I think, the current Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister would agree with that. And Minister, they can't disagree with that. That is being, fair to all citizens.
Of the 40 recommendations from the first part of this project, the police have made 8 a priority. They include changes to training, collecting better prosecution data, and withdrawing from some mental health incidents.
Not all. We will still have a service for those that are violent, those that have gotten beyond the control of what families can handle at that particular time, for instance. We will still have a response to that. There's a better response model, which is what is the recommendation. The better response model is that it's not only police that attend these events, but they're attended by health professionals, they're attended by people with specialist knowledge and specialist training into how to speak or de-escalate or offer the best and most appropriate care for someone that is having a mental health episode at that time. Police are not always the best people for this.
Police aren't going to be able to pull out from those responses until another agency particularly something in the health sector rather than the justice sector, is able to step in. They obviously can't leave a gap, so this requires cooperation and response from some other, so it's an all-of-government response from some other agency to step in. But that's been called for by the police. Our researchers similarly recommend it, that having police officers at those kinds of incidents actually escalates tension, doesn't solve or even address the health-based issue there.
One of the findings of the report was that people who have difficulty communicating are often seen as non-compliant by police. An analysis found half of people tasered had mental health issues, but police don't necessarily have that information in the heat of a moment, nor are they trained in de-escalation.
There are some fantastic de-escalation models around globally, and if we look at it within the research that's been done here, we could design a de-escalation that does pay heed to the fact that a large proportion of the people that we are dealing with in use of force situations are suffering from some form of mental health episode, and then work with that understanding to find ways of communicating best.
Another recommendation is to collect more data around certain groups. That's more paperwork. Do you worry that that's going to take the police away from the front line? It puts more pressure on the police when, we know that the police are already under pressure and understaffed.
Yeah, we do have a lot on our plate. We do have a lot of things to do in terms of the accurate collection of data. So there's a lot of stuff that we collect now as well. I would always want it to be as efficient as possible. So I'll always, from an operational perspective, would look at the efficiencies that can be gained. We've already experienced over the last 2 years an advancement on what we can do on our phones, on our devices. So long as it's an efficient use, whilst we are at a person's home, for instance, or while we're on the side of the street speaking to somebody, or at a car stop, or wherever we happen to be, if we have efficiencies or technological efficiencies built into that system, then by all means I think we should be able to collect data.
And Kylie Quince says the issue that stands out to her from this exercise is the need for ongoing training in the police.
You've got someone with 20 years' experience working at the front line who went to police college 20 years ago. And so things clearly move on. And so the need and ability to undertake on-the-job training. It's been quite common in my experience during this project to see police have a very compliance-based mindset. Have we done things according to the rules? And have we done this lawfully? Well, you may have done things lawfully and according to the rules, but you still didn't do them very well, and you could do them better. So having a very black and white view of was that allowed is not a particularly great way to undertake professional development. So changing that mindset that they are going to be lifelong learners, and we say that in primary school, but it's relevant to all humans. You're better at whatever it is that you choose to do if you keep up with the latest training opportunity.
How confident are you that this is really going to make a difference, and how quickly will we see change?
I think those two things I would take together, because I'm confident that because it's been owned by police leadership, because it's had that operational insight from those frontline officers, I'm confident that this research will stand the test of time.
And what about those doing the mahi on the front line?
There's a lot of pressure put on police at the moment. We're in the media a lot. Law and Order is one of the principal media pieces that we see all the time, and we feel this as well. Resentment is something that's real, but we can work through it. It's just allowing ourselves to get out of that churn and be able to reflect on our activities. And if our OHG as a representative of 30 people can do it, then I think we can scale it. I really think there's a lot to be valued.
There's another tranche of research coming from these reports towards the end of the year. That's it for today. The Detail is supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was engineered by Rangi Poick and produced by Alexia Russell. Thanks to Kylie Quince and Superintendent Scott Gemmell. I'm Sharon Brett Kelly. Mā te wā.